Welcome to the SimHERA tutorial on how to set protocols. We currently have created a case. If you want to see how to create cases, check out the tutorial on how to create cases. So we have this case. By default, it will create a protocol that is associated with the case's profile or case history. In this situation, we have a case history that the patient reported hearing loss, dizziness, and balance. And so that usually indicates that we should be doing some type of neurological assessment, typically with ABR neurological evaluations. So if we click over here to the protocols, it automatically put the default protocol as adult auditory evoked potential neurological assessment. But there are a whole bunch of standard protocols, neurological, medical, legal, for the different default ones based on those cases. Now you can select any one you like. Let's say we don't want to do neurological, we want to do a standard behavioral. Given this case, we can click on standard behavioral and it will update all of the different protocols and the different protocol settings. I'm going to go back to AEP neurological because that's what's based for this case. What we can see underneath the default protocols are the test types, so tympanometry, acoustic reflex, behavioral, ABR neurological, ECOG, DPOAs, cortical auditory evoked potentials, ABR thresholds, steady state, middle latency responses. The order in which the protocols should be, these tests should be tested within the protocols is listed here on the left. If they're a positive number, not including 0, then those are mandatory tests that the user or the learner needs to do to get full score. And you can reorder these if you like. So let's say we want to do behavioral first. We can put behavioral 1, and let's say we'll do behavioral acoustic reflex tympanometry. Click on reorder and it will reorder that. So now behavioral assessment should be done first. I'm just going to go back to that standard one. So if we click on that, the panel on the right will update for tympanometry protocols. We currently have one measure that's going to be auto-scored. By the way, this protocol is for auto-scoring the learners' testing as they're progressing through their tests. It will score each individual test type based on these protocols. So currently the auto-scoring will be done for admittance. This is for single frequency. Admittance protocols here are shown on the right for this admittance single. And you can choose the default, which is the default SimHERA ones, but you can also load up your own custom ones, and I'll show you how to do that for behavioral in a moment. Underneath that is the mandatory conditions list. For tympanometry, you can test these in any order. So if the user happens to be testing the right ear instead of the left ear first, then they still will count for the auto scoring and they won't come up with an incorrect error. In this case, we have left ear 226 hertz probe tone, and this up here describes how you should be naming your protocols. Please note that there needs to be a comma and a space. So comma separated plus a space in your listing. So if I were to do another one for some reason, put in 1000 hertz, there needs to be a comma space before you enter the next one. Underneath that is the discretionary conditions. So let's say we only wanted to do left ear, and then discretionary was right ear for some strange reason. We could put the right ear down here as a discretionary condition. So this would count to the mandatory scores. If they didn't do the discretionary condition, they can still score 100% overall. But if they did do the discretionary condition, those scores will then be added on top of it. It's kind of like bonus work if you're thinking about grading in exams. Over to the right, if you leave one of the tests not tested, so the conditions not tested, so let's say the user only did left ear 226 and they did not do the right ear, then those points, those overall points that you would expect to have gained for that condition needs to count somewhere, and it counts in the total score. Just like as in an exam, you have unanswered questions, they still count to the overall total percentage or the total score in the denominator. So this is adding to the denominator of your total score. So if we see in acoustic reflexes here, we've got a whole bunch of different tests here, and in the untested condition, we count each one of those conditions should be 5 points to be scored if they don't get tested. Quickly just looking at that, if we go over to the test scores, I've done some acoustic reflex testing on this individual already, and we can see here acoustic reflex testing, and I'm just going to click restore here to show you that it's intensity by trials. So this is trial 1, the first instance I did it, second, third, fourth, and I was going up in intensity, and that hit threshold there, so it's circled in pink. What I was saying about the total score is that I did all of these tests 100% correct because I used the proper step size, and that's what's shown over here in correct made. So if we look at the total score for the acoustic reflex tests performed, I have correct tests 16, errors made 0, total tested 16. So I scored 100% overall, but had I handed this assignment in, I would have missed 190 points because there are 106 total points that should have been done because there were more tests in this protocol that I didn't do. Okay, so this is basically an assignment saying here are the questions that the students need to, or the learners need to perform, and they need to answer, and if they don't, they get 0 on those, but those total scores still count the overall scoring of percent here. So I performed pretty poorly, 15%. This is a good way for doing automatic scoring. Also, for the automatic scoring, you can actually click on each one of these and see how the student learner, or yourself if you're reviewing your own, how you performed, where you made corrects made and errors made, and it tells you the stimulus information over here on the right. And this will be the same situation that you can do for all the different types of measures. So I also did tympanometry here, and I actually started in the right, and you can see the right ear 226 hertz was a probe frequency, and my next condition, meaning I started with the proper condition, was correct, and I used the proper timp frequency, and then I moved to the left ear and I made corrects on there. So it's a good way to review how you do on different tests perform, and it can track, and you can track and see how you're performing at each individual condition that you're testing. Okay, so back to protocols, and then behavioral. I'll show you how to load up different custom programs in a second, but we can see behavioral, there are a lot of different ones here. You can, let's say we only wanted to test the left ear up to 8,000 hertz for some reason. We can leave it like that. We can then lock our protocols, so now everything is locked, and then we can save this case and send it off if you're in assignment mode to your students to perform, or if you're a student working in training mode, you can lock this and say, and perform your tests and give it to your classmate and say, hey, look, see how you can perform against me, and you can have some competition going on there. But any changes, make sure you unlock that, and let's move on to showing how you can use custom. So custom would be changing from the default to custom. Now I've already set up a file called custom behavioral conditions, okay, and I can load that in, and you can see how it changed there. And that's because I will pop up the text file that I saved this in. So how to create your own custom protocols for each of your different test types is you put mandatory, make sure you spell it right, with a space, colon, space, and then your conditions, comma, space, your next condition, so on and so forth, and then discretional. And you could put discretional ones in here. Let's say if we wanted to do left ear AC 8,000 hertz, space, or comma, space. And then we can save that, and I'll do that right now. We'll save that, and we'll go back into SimHERA and we'll load up that custom one again, and now it has discretional condition of L left ear AC 8,000 hertz listed there. So that's how you can do custom. You can also save this. Once you have all your protocols done, you can save this as custom, and then so we'll just go in here and we'll save this as custom protocols. I've already made one, so go ahead and you can overwrite, and then you can load that back in. When you load it back in, everything will come back like you had originally. So we'll just delete those and saying we have this other protocol in there, and now we can go and load what we actually saved, and boom, it comes back. So you can make your own custom protocols, and then you can lock that out, so you don't have to make all your changes all the time. Make it once, and if that's the way that is for your early hearing programs or your local clinical protocols, you can save it and call it local clinical protocols and reload it. Okay, so that's mandatory and discretionary conditions. Auto scoring also requires criteria to be able to say, did the learners or did the tester meet the criteria? So for tympanometry, it's basic admittance testing. There really isn't any criteria set. Acoustic reflex, there are some criteria here. So minimum acoustic reflex amplitude that you would expect to see to say that there is a response. Starting intensity, the step size, whether you're using a 5 dB, 10 dB step size, and then threshold scoring, is it in range? So the threshold scoring range really actually comes to when you're doing the case report. So when you're doing tympanometry or acoustic reflexes, which we can see here, I was doing some acoustic reflexes, and I would set in here before it was like 90, and then this 1000 hertz was greater than 110. If I go and look at the case report, that's also down here in the bottom for acoustic reflexes. Now, the protocol has this threshold scoring range, plus or minus 8 dB. And what that really is doing is that when I go and score the report, it's going to say, okay, 90 dB, was that within 8 dB of the true acoustic reflex threshold? And we can quickly just check that. Go over to simulate case, go to thresholds, and then look at the acoustic reflex threshold IPSI for the 500 hertz, and it was 86. And I said 90, so therefore I'm within 8 dB, and I would score a point for that. Okay, so that's threshold scoring there. Now behavioral has a whole bunch of other criteria here. So tone duration, did the user push the button down and deliver the stimulus for longer than 1 second, or 1 second or longer? Were the presentation intervals too consistent? The starting intensity, whether or not you're following an ASHA guideline, if you want to go from an ascending approach, or some other clinical protocols that go from a descending approach. You start at a higher intensity than what you expect the threshold to be. The step size, so this is the dB up, dB down if you're using a Houston-Westlake procedure. Then the threshold scoring, how many correct out of the number of presentations that you gave would you say threshold should be scored? Is this 2 out of 3 or 2 out of 4 or 3 out of 4, depending on your clinic? Again, threshold scoring range, I already explained that. And then intraoral attenuation criteria for contralateral masking. Contralateral masking is not currently scored, but I've left these protocols in here so you can change them, and future updates will have it so that when you're putting in contralateral masking, it will use this as a criteria here, as well as the safety factors and occlusion effect. And then in the case for ABR neurological, starting intensity and then latency scoring range for where the waveforms are marked, so on and so forth. So there are a lot of different criteria for these different test types in here that we have. Okay, so once you've changed all your protocols, you're happy with them, I recommend you lock the protocols, because if you've changed them, when you save the case, that will save this in a locked format so that when the case gets loaded, it will use these changes that you've made. If you load in the case, it will default back to the SimHERA's default protocols. So make sure before you save the case that you lock your protocols. Especially when you're working in assignment mode, instructors, you want to lock those protocols because it will default back. Okay, so that's how we set protocols, and that's how it's related. Those protocols are related to the auto scoring. And you can see that overall test scores, which I didn't mention prior, of the total case score includes the testing of the tympanometry, the acoustic reflex, everything. So there should have been 112 different total scores going on here. And so I'm only scoring 20% overall. But total tested, I was 100% accurate. And so you can use this if you're learning yourself, if you're a student, you're seeing how well you did in certain different areas, you can use this kind of information to guide where you need to focus your attention on improving your skills. For instructors, you could use this for grading the assignments that's already scored for you, and you can make some comments in here. If we're in assignment mode, this will say instructor comments. You can make some comments and feedback and send that back to the students. The user's tester name, please put in your tester name when you're handing in assignments. It helps the instructors to know who was the tester. Different tests that were performed and their scoring of them will be updated and saved when you do a save report after you've done a full scoring of your assignment. And that's also the case in assignment mode. I hope you enjoyed this video and have fun learning. I will see you next time.